So, welcome back. Hope you're all doing well. If you are new, welcome to my true crime channel where we discuss wrong-uns of all kinds from all over the world. And today's case is, I think, a fairly well-known one, maybe more so in America than here in the UK. It certainly contributed to a very famous saying over in the US, which I'll touch on later. But we start today in the year 2006 in Goleta, which is a city in Santa Barbara County, California. Goleta is on the coast right by the beach and it looks lovely. This, plus the low levels of serious crime in the area, made Goleta a popular place to live in 2006. But on January 30th, 2006, that impressive record of low crime levels would be blown apart by a terrible event that would shock the area for many years to come. At 9 p.m. that day, police at the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department received numerous panicked 911 calls from workers at the United States Postal Service Mail Processing and Distribution Center in Goleta. Now, this is a huge mail sorting plant, a 200,000 square foot building where hundreds of local people are employed. And these phone calls are telling police that someone's shooting at people seemingly at random inside of the building, and there is already at least one person dead. This sounds incredibly serious, so of course the police head straight over. They have no idea what they're going to see. They don't even know how many shooters there are, so they try to ask people who are coming out of the building what's going on in there, but these people are running at full sprint away from the building, so it's difficult to get anyone to talk. These people are in full survival mode and are running for their lives. Finally, when police manage to get some answers from people, they find out that someone has approached the building, stepped out of their vehicle and started shooting at staff in the car park. Then they've walked inside the building and continued shooting in there. The police at this point still don't know if the shooter is even in there or if they've already left, and they need to find out, so they approach the building. Once they get through the doors, they realise that a mail sorting plant has a lot of very large machinery, so no shots can even be heard above all that if the shooting is even still going on. So with all of this in mind, the police go back out into the car park, tend to those who have been shot outside and wait for SWAT teams to come. In the meantime, 4 ambulances arrive to collect the people who've been shot in the car park. It's such an emergency situation that there's no time to treat people on the scene. It's a case of each ambulance collecting one person and racing them to the hospital. As all of this chaos is going on, more people have emerged from the building and are able to tell police who the shooter is because they know them. It's their former co-worker, and her name is Jennifer San Marco. One lone armed female has walked into her old place of employment and started to shoot staff members seemingly at random. But who is Jennifer San Marco and why is she doing this? Well, Jennifer San Marco was born on the 6th of December 1961 in New York, and she grew up in Brooklyn where she attended the Edward R. Murrow High School. Jennifer was a quiet and pretty young girl, and as a result, numerous boys in school had a crush on her. But as much as she seemed a pleasant young lady, she didn't really have a friendship group of any kind. She was mostly alone. And in terms of Jennifer's family, not much is known about her at all. It's believed that she had a brother and sister, but she didn't really speak about her family to her classmates, and they got the impression that it wasn't something that she ever wanted to talk about. And what struck me about this case is, for one that's so well known and widely reported on, it's quite difficult to find out exactly what Jennifer's family situation was growing up, so there's not much we can learn about her from her younger days. In 1978, Jennifer graduated from high school and she went on to study Natural Resources Management at Brooklyn College. Then, sometime later, after leaving college, she moved to California, where in 1989 she took a job as a prison guard in the medium security Chuckawalla Valley State Prison in Blythe. But for some reason, she quit just 2 days before her probation ended. This was quite strange for her employers, who considered her to be good at her job, so they were surprised when she left. Then Jennifer moved on to work as a police dispatcher in the mid-90s. She passed all of the relevant background checks that come with taking a job as important as this, plus she underwent psychological testing. Everything came back clear and she was deemed psychologically fit for the role. But again, after just a few months, Jennifer decided to leave her job as a dispatcher and move on. This didn't seem strange to anyone though, because it is a stressful job and it's not uncommon at all for people to leave once they experience the reality of a role like that. And that's exactly why Jennifer left. It was stressful for her and she couldn't handle it. Jennifer then got a couple of other random jobs before eventually finding work as an entry-level clerk in 1997 at the United States Postal Service after again having passed the required background checks. And Jennifer commences work in this huge mail sorting facility full of very large, noisy mail sorting machines in a centre which is the size of around 4.5 American football fields. And she gets off to a good start all round. She moves into a condo nearby with great neighbours and she's good at her new job. She's a fast worker and is, just like in school, a hit with her male co-workers who can't help but notice that she's a very attractive lady who is pleasant and friendly. And it's a good job too, with decent pay, nice co-workers and good benefits. Jennifer works the late shift at the plant, which starts at 9 p.m, and she has her own little station where she's seated in front of lots of pigeonholes. She takes the mail that the large machines can't decipher the address from and she sorts those into the relevant pigeonholes. And all is going well, but after a while, Jennifer changes. It's gradual at first. She goes from being mostly chatty and pleasant with her co-workers to only sometimes being that way. And other days she doesn't talk to anyone. She keeps her head down and won't even acknowledge them. And then it progresses a little more to the point where Jennifer is talking, but not to anyone she works with. She's sat at her station talking, but there's no one there. And at first these conversations are calm, but after a while it gets to the point where she's actually arguing with someone, but there's no one there. And whilst this is very disconcerting to her co-workers, Jennifer is still doing her work and doing a good job, so nothing's done about it. I think perhaps they just see her as eccentric but harmless. But then Jennifer escalates further in her behaviour, both in the workplace and at home. She's seen outside her home yelling the lyrics to rap songs, which, as we know, can often be quite X-rated, so the neighbours don't take well to this at all. And then she progresses to screaming randomly at people and shouting threatening things at them for no apparent reason. Jennifer gets some new tattoos and she shows her neighbour them, and when she doesn't get the reaction she's after from this neighbour, she doesn't like it at all. So she starts walking around her neighbour in circles, spitting on the ground as she goes. This, of course, is very intimidating to this neighbour who gets away from her as quickly as possible, genuinely frightened by Jennifer's behaviour. And Jennifer is particularly intimidating towards her next door neighbour, Beverly Graham. Jennifer frequently goes outside of her house shouting and singing at the top of her voice, and when Beverly complains about this to Jennifer, she becomes very angry and argues with her. This happens a few times, so Beverly calls the police to get them to come over to tell Jennifer to keep the noise down. And this is an insult to Jennifer, who originally, after being very friendly with Beverly, decides that she does not like Beverly at all and acts up even more around her to cause trouble. And in the workplace, Jennifer is no longer pleasant to anyone. She starts shouting at her co-workers for no apparent reason, or she just ignores them altogether. But just to be clear, she never threatens them in any way and they never feel scared of her. And Jennifer's appearance changes too. She goes from being well put together to becoming unkempt and doing strange things, like instead of applying lipstick normally, she'll just smear bright red lipstick right across her face. And Jennifer then spirals even more, and it gets to the point where she's shouting racist remarks and saying things that are completely inappropriate to her co-workers. And things get so bad that her supervisors request that she's taken from her workplace by the sheriff's deputies. The reason being is that she's got herself underneath one of their mail sorting machines, which is, of course, dangerous. The deputies actually have to pull her out from under there, and she's really resisting. So in the end, they have to put her in handcuffs and then put her into a mail trolley so that they're physically able to get her out of the building. And Jennifer is taken to a psychiatric hospital in Ventura to be assessed over a period of 3 days. The reason her supervisors requested she be taken away was for Jennifer's own safety. They were only ever concerned that she'd hurt herself, no one else. So Jennifer is assessed and receives a diagnosis, but I can't find out what that diagnosis was. Again, the information out there about Jennifer is very limited, so we don't know what she was diagnosed with, but we know that she was assessed and then released after a few days, and in actual fact, did return to work a while later. But in 2003, after this and a few other disturbances with Jennifer happening, including her making racist remarks, it's just not feasible for her to be kept on as an employee. She's refused to receive treatment for her mental health problems, she won't even accept that she has a problem, and she isn't acting within company guidelines. So they retire Jennifer on the grounds of a psychological disability. So now Jennifer is out of work and she decides to leave the area. She releases her condo, packs up her pickup truck and heads away in an easterly direction. But on the way, her car breaks down in a place called Grants Milan in New Mexico. It's sometimes called Grants, sometimes Milan, sometimes Grants Milan, depending on where I look, so I'll refer to it as Milan for the purposes of this video. Milan is a very small, quiet, remote city of 2,500 people in New Mexico, around 70 miles west of Albuquerque. And Jennifer, after randomly breaking down there in her truck, decides she likes it, and she then finds herself a new home there. And again, at first, things go well. The locals meet her and she seems a very nice woman who fits in well. And it stays that way for almost a year. Jennifer becomes known as a good customer in the local shops and an all-round quiet but pleasant woman. But again, just like in Goleta, after a while, Jennifer begins to spiral. In early 2004, Jennifer starts to visit the Milan Village Hall offices pretty regularly. Firstly, she tries to sign up for a business licence because she wants to start a newsletter, which she intends to title The Racist Press, but she doesn't qualify for the licence. And then she tries again to register for a business licence to start up a cat food selling company, but again she's denied due to the particular area she lives in not being eligible to receive this particular licence. And whilst making these requests for licences, Jennifer's behaviour gets stranger. She'll be speaking to office workers and at the same time she'll be having a whole other conversation with someone who isn't there. And just like before, these conversations then turn into arguments. The workers there obviously know this is strange behaviour, but they mostly feel sympathy for Jennifer as she's clearly not well and they just feel sorry for her. But their sympathy can only stretch so far when Jennifer starts to become obsessed with one employee in particular, a woman named Sonia Salazar. Whenever Jennifer goes into the village hall, she asks for Sonia and refuses to deal with anyone but Sonia. Sometimes she'll come in and just stand and stare at Sonia without saying a word. It gets to the point where Sonia has to hide in another room when she sees Jennifer coming and stay there until she leaves. But it's when Jennifer starts shouting that Sonia is having an affair with a local man that the workers in the office decide to call the authorities because firstly it's not true and it's also intimidating and quite scary for Sonia. So a police report against Jennifer of verbal harassment is filed and the police go to see Jennifer about this complaint, but they don't find her, and as Jennifer never visits the office again, the police don't take it any further. And away from the village hall, Jennifer's behaviour is being noticed. She's seen talking to herself as she walks around the local area. She's seen rifling through dumpsters, and sometimes whilst out driving, she'll get out of the car in the middle of the road and get on her knees to pray. At one point, a local lady named Darlene spots Jennifer kneeling in front of her car praying, and she asks her if she's okay, and Jennifer says they pray before they get in. They are Jennifer's brother and sister, who she claims are with her, but of course they aren't. She's on her own. Now, Darlene has worked in mental health for 2 decades by this point, so she can see this woman is unwell. She calls the police to get Jennifer assessed and leaves Jennifer at the post office so that the police know where to collect her. But as it happens, the police don't turn up, so Jennifer goes home and continues to go on in the state that she is, totally unchecked. Later, the police would claim that they have no record of Darlene making this call, but Darlene knows that she did. And Jennifer's behaviour continues. She becomes well known for shouting at imaginary people in the street. She buys groceries, then immediately puts them all in the bin. She orders food in restaurants only to run away shortly after, leaving her food uneaten on the table. She turns up at the local petrol station naked, prompting locals to call the police to come get her, which they do. But all that happens is that she's told it's not okay to go out in public naked. Then Jennifer is spotted looking more and more unkempt. She looks very different how she did when she first arrived. She's even shaved her own head very badly, leaving random long pieces of hair all over her head. It seems at this point her outward appearance is starting to mimic the chaos of what's going on inside her own mind. The fact that Jennifer never has visitors and is alone a lot of the time means that she's spending 24 hours a day trapped alone with her own mind, which can only have made things worse. If someone had been with her, they may have done something about this, but instead she's just left on her own with the intensity of her own thoughts. It's now 2005 and Jennifer decides she wants to buy a gun. So she goes to the local pawn shop and fills in the relevant forms to buy herself a second-hand 9mm Smith & Wesson semi-automatic handgun. She waits the required 15-day waiting time and passes all of the relevant checks, at which point she purchases this gun for $325, alongside 200 rounds of 9mm ammunition. In Jennifer's backyard, she has a lot of desolate desert-type land, so it's perfect for her to set up a little area to do some target practice, and over time, she becomes a very good shot. Then, on the 30th of January 2006, Jennifer, in her pickup truck, turns up at the place she left just a few years before, her former hometown of Goleta in Santa Barbara, California. And she makes her way to her former place of work, the United States Postal Service Processing and Distribution Center. Jennifer, of course, knows the way this building works, and she knows that there's a shift change at 9 p.m, because that used to be her shift. So she waits until 9 p.m. for a staff member to enter the car park, and she drives in right behind them, tailgating them so she can get beyond the security barriers unchecked. She parks around 100 feet from the building and gets out of her truck. She immediately stops a worker who is approaching the building, presents her gun, and demands he hand over his employee badge, which he does. She then, for some reason, spares this man's life and tells him to leave immediately, which, of course, he does. So now a 44-year-old armed, very mentally unwell Jennifer San Marco has full security access to her former workplace. This building holds 300 employees, but on this particular evening, 80 people are on shift. Jennifer, who is still in the car park, starts to walk towards the building, and whilst walking, she passes a 37-year-old lady named Z Fairchild, who she shoots and kills outright. Almost straight after this, a 28-year-old lady named Malika Higgins is also shot by Jennifer San Marco. And then she shoots 42-year-old Nicola Grant and proceeds to enter the building. Whilst this is happening, some staff members who are in the break room, which is right next to the car park, hear some sounds that appear to sound like gunshots. So they look out of the window and see Jennifer San Marco standing there, who then makes direct eye contact with them and smiles. As for the staff in the workrooms, they hear sounds, but it's so noisy in there anyway, they don't really cause much alarm. It's only when a few workers go around the corner, they see a male staff member grab a female colleague and physically throw her towards the door, shouting for her to run. Jennifer has been making her way further into the building, where she encounters and then shoots 44-year-old Charlotte Colton. Charlotte is pulled away into a corridor by a co-worker, and then Jennifer continues to walk around the building, reloading her gun and shooting at will. Jennifer walks up to the station that she used to work at just a few years before, and she sees 52-year-old Guadalupe Schwartz, who sees Jennifer coming and tries to run, but Jennifer shoots her 4 times. Next, she approaches 57-year-old Dexter Shannon. Dexter is wearing headphones and so doesn't even hear Jennifer coming before she shoots him at point-blank range. The police by this point have arrived and are waiting for the SWAT team because they don't know at this point how many attackers there are and if they're still shooting. Meanwhile, Jennifer, still inside the building, decides to end this horrific ordeal by entering a room, turning the gun on herself and taking her own life. When the SWAT team eventually make it into the building, they find Jennifer on the floor and they have to forcefully prise the gun from Jennifer's hand, such is the intensity that she's holding it with, even in death. But even though Jennifer is now dead, the night isn't over yet. After 6 people have been shot, 4 of which have died at the scene and 2 of which have been taken away with life-threatening injuries, the police receive another call. The partner of Beverly Graham calls police to say that he's found her dead in her home. Now, you may remember the name Beverly Graham because she is Jennifer's former neighbour, the one who complained about the noise and had several arguments with Jennifer whilst she lived there. So the police turn up at Beverly's home and they find 54-year-old Beverly has been shot dead. A struggle has clearly taken place in the home. There is hair found in there that's clearly been ripped out straight from the head, and items have been broken and knocked over. The bullets used to kill Beverly are 9mm, and between that and her previous relationship with Jennifer, police are quickly able to make the connection that it was Jennifer who was responsible for this killing. Beverly's neighbours said that between 7:15pm and 8:15pm they heard gunshots, and it's thought that before she turned up at her former place of work at 9pm, Jennifer made a stop at Beverly's home. She climbed up the wall around the back of the apartment and opened a sliding glass door, which Beverly had left unlocked. Then, after a struggle, Jennifer shot Beverly, left the apartment and made her way over to the mail centre to cause more devastation. In the days following this terrible night, the police looked into Jennifer and discovered all of the things I've already told you. They searched her house and found the newsletter that she tried to launch, The Racist Press. There were 5 volumes there of her writings, which mostly included rants that didn't make much sense. They read that she believed the US government was connected to racist murders and the KKK, and that the government is ruled by white supremacy, and the film The Rocky Horror Picture Show, which, just by watching the film, encourages people to kill. She also wrote a lot about serial killer David Berkowitz, otherwise known as the son of Sam, who was at the peak of his killings in New York, where Jennifer lived when she was 16 years old. Jennifer at the time would have perfectly fit the description of the kind of women Berkowitz would attack. She was young and pretty with long dark hair, and girls like her at the time did not feel safe at all, and so it seems like this really stuck with Jennifer because she mentioned him a lot. And apparently Berkowitz was also a postal worker. These are, of course, the writings of a woman who was very mentally unwell, but there were some vague references in her diary as to what she was planning. In her diary, Jennifer noted down each time someone upset or offended her. Even the slightest thing she didn't like, she'd written it all down in meticulous detail. She also wrote that the local police and staff at her former workplace were all plotting against her. She was still angry about the time police took her from her workplace to a mental health facility. It's thought by a lot of people that this crime was racially motivated. Jennifer's own co-workers pointed out that everyone she shot that night, aside from Beverly, were all belonging to ethnic minorities. 3 were black, 1 was Chinese American, 1 was Hispanic, and 1 was Filipino. Add to that the fact that Jennifer used to say racist comments at work, and there's a pretty good case there to say that whilst Jennifer was clearly very mentally unwell, Racism was also something that seemed to be apparent throughout Jennifer's life. On the evening of the 30th of January 2006, Jennifer San Marco shot and killed 7 people. Most died immediately and 2 were taken from the scene alive but died days later. And this was an incredibly shocking crime, not least because this was a woman committing a very violent mass killing, which is pretty rare. And of course, with all crimes like this, the focus in the media is always on the perpetrator and not the victims. I've managed to find some information on each of them, which I believe is correct, but my apologies if it's not totally accurate. Nicola Grant, aged 42, was a married mother of 2 who was often seen playing basketball with her 2 children outside of her house. She was described as a joyful person. Charlotte Colton, aged 44, was described as beautiful inside and out. She was a mother of 3 who left behind her sons and her husband Jim. It's said that people wanted to be a better person around her. Malika Higgins, aged 28, had only returned to work from maternity leave a month prior to the attacks, which meant that she left behind a brand new baby girl and her husband. She was described as a chatty lady who loved to talk and lighten the mood wherever she went. Guadalupe Schwartz, aged 52, had lost her husband to cancer just 3 years prior to the attack, and she was finally starting to get on with things and become more active when her life was tragically taken. Say Fairchild, aged 37, was married with a son. She was described as a smiling, happy and strong lady who adored her family. Her family said that they hoped if nothing else could come from the tragedy of her death, it would be that regardless of race, creed or colour, we are all human and we should live together in harmony. Beverly Graham, aged 54, was a telephone operator by trade who had lived in Santa Barbara for a long time. She was described as a lovely woman. Dexter Shannon, aged 57, was an Air Force veteran of the Vietnam War. He had grandchildren and was described as a very nice man who never said a bad word about anyone. In terms of the safety of the building where this took place, the facility itself had, just 2 months before the attack, been inspected and had a safety review, and it was described as one of the most secure postal facilities in the country. Officials said shortly after the shooting it was a model facility before and it continues to be a model facility today. They said one reason it didn't have guards was because the area was considered safe and there was no reasonable need to have security guards there. There's no doubt in this case that there are some similarities to the case that I covered on Richard Farley, which I will link if you haven't seen it yet, and the reasons are obvious. Someone walks into their place of work armed and kills innocent people. But I also think in some ways it is also similar to my Odessa Carey case, whereby here is a woman who is clearly very mentally unwell and is showing it in every interaction she has with the outside world. And yet no proper treatment is ever received, and as a result, terrible things happen. Now, I'm not a mental health professional by any stretch of the imagination, but surely more could have been done and more needs to be done to try to prevent things like this happening as a clear, direct result of mental illness. Now, I did say earlier that attacks like this are rare, but when it comes specifically to these kind of events involving postal workers, it's actually rather less rare. At the beginning of the video, I said this attack contributed to a very famous saying, which is the term going postal. This term is American slang, which means to become incredibly angry, so angry that you may become violent, and usually in the workplace. So people, if they notice that a colleague is having a particularly bad day at work and is getting pretty angry, might say he or she is about to go postal. And the term itself came about due to the United States Postal Service experiencing a number of events where killings took place directly involving their employees or former employees. Apparently, there's about 20 separate incidents like this where people died because they came into contact with a postal worker who got up that day and decided to kill. Before this case with Jennifer San Marco, there were around 7 separate events between 1970 and 1993 where postal workers or former postal workers killed their co-workers and various other people in their lives. So after this case in 2006, this term "going postal" was coined, much to the dismay of the USPS, who have for years now tried to get people to stop using the term, but it's pretty embedded into people's brains now, so I doubt it'll be forgotten for a while. Even after this case, there were another 2 more killings that involved postal workers killing their co-workers. It really is a terrible but also undoubtedly interesting phenomenon. And I thought I'd just mention that, as it is quite unusual and directly connected to this case. And that's it. I hope you found this case interesting. If you did, please give me a like, comment and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. My Twitter handle is also down below in the description box if you'd like to follow me over on there too. Have a great day, stay safe, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.